Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it is coffee time. Cheers. A time where I go over some of the stuff that come across my desk since the last coffee break. And as you can see, I have the Patriarchy card via P Club member, which authorizes me to comment on all the comings and goings of the evil feminist empire with its thousands of tentacles around the world. Today, as you see in the title, we have Janice Fiamengo with us. Again, she's obviously a regular here, needs no introduction. And we'll be talking about how the woke students at McGill University are rising up once again in another effort to shut down freedom of speech on campus, which of course ultimately they like to shut down in our entire culture. Welcome to all of you, Michael and John Jacques, Philly Rader, quite a few of the regular names on here. With no further ado, we're going to get straight into it and bring Janice Fiamengo right into the show. Hi, Janice.
Hey, hi, Steve. How's it going?
Pretty good. I'm sitting down here suffering away in what I think is about 85-degree weather.
Yeah.
I think it's only 80 today. I'm feeling a little chilled.
Don't rub it in.
How is it there in Vancouver?
Well, it's not bad today. It's sunny and it's about, it's about 9 degrees, I think, or it's supposed to be, which for any American listeners, what is that? Just below 50 Fahrenheit. But it's been pretty miserable, dark, rainy a lot of the time. So, yeah.
And you only have, 6 months left to endure that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Until
it might warm up in June. Yeah.
You're scheduled 2 days of sun in June?
That's about it. Wow.
Well, let's get straight into the meat of the material. This is a serious topic, and as everyone on our channel knows, we've been dealing with the issue of freedom of speech and, of course, presumption of innocence. This is freedom of speech we'll be specifically dealing with today. And we've been dealing with this from the beginning. Yeah. So let's pop the title of this letter. This is what we're going to go over today, folks, is a letter from a bunch of students' unions, and there's the undersigned are here, on the McGill campus, University of McGill, and they are demanding that the university, that they overhaul their statements on academic freedom of speech. Yeah. Which is alarming, to say the least, and fully in line with everything we've come to expect with these miniature little tyrants in the growing there. So let's put this straight up here. Where's my little clicker button? Here we go. Open letter demanding overhaul of McGill's Statement of Academic Freedom. And this came out just 4 days ago.
Yeah, on Monday. It's signed by, I don't know if you can flip to the end, whether that's possible. It's not necessary, but it's signed by 8 different student societies. And I think that's interesting. And one of them, of course, is the Student Society at McGill University, which is the same bad actor that we were talking about a week and a half ago when we were discussing the smearing of that one student's reputation who had actually run for a position on the Student Society of McGill University, and then had been cut down by this claim of sexual assault. So there they are again, the Student Society of McGill, the executive team, plus the Anthropology Students Association, most alarmingly, I think, the Anthropology Graduate Students Association. That is staggering. So these are the elite students, those who are doing master's degrees and PhDs in anthropology, joining their voices to this woke group demanding that academic freedom be curtailed by, the values of inclusion and avoiding hurt feelings. The rest of the signatories are, I don't know how significant these are. The World Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies Association, the Black Students Network, the Muslim Students Association, and there's a couple more, Students for Palestinian Rights and something else, I forget, another Muslim Student Association. So that's kind of interesting in the sense that it shows us that Black and Muslim students are particularly taking this moment to come forward and assert their right that nothing that they disagree with should be allowed to be published by or spoken in a university classroom. And they're actually targeting, and we'll get to this in a minute, they're actually targeting a retired professor who has been writing articles and books in his retirement, as professors are wont to do, and they're demanding that he not even be allowed to do that, or at least that he not be allowed to do it without being personally disgraced by having his emeritus status removed. So this is, well, it's just an outrageous, arrogant move by these cry bully students. It's, as you say, totally in line with everything we've been talking about over the last 8 years, but still outrageous.
Janice, can I trouble you to just click on your camera mic settings in the below bar there,
Mm-hmm.
and then click on audio.
Okay, yeah.
And you in the audio you can see a selection of mics drop down.
Echo cancellation. Do you want me to? No.
No. Just look at the top. There's it's set. There's a drop down where you can choose mics.
Yeah.
Check and see if the right mic is connected, because you might not be using your Yeti mic there.
I think so. It says Yeti stereo microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what other options do you have under there?
Well, a whole bunch that have the same thing, actually. It says Yeti stereo microphone, Yeti stereo microphone, microphone. Okay. Yeah, it's all says the same thing. Cancel
out of there, because I thought maybe it wasn't picking the right mic because of the amount of hum coming.
Oh, it's too bad. There is something called echo cancellation. Would it help if I clicked on that? Oh, it's got that. It's got that highlighted. So I guess, yeah. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. Let's just power on, and let's get straight to the meat of the letter, shall we?
Yeah, let's.
Okay. I'll just read out these are all, I've segmented it into points. So CW, I don't know what that is, some kind of a warning, or like
content warning, I think it stands for.
Crapes.
That's amazing.
Right off the bat, we're not talking about people who are ready for university here when they need to be warned about stuff before they look at it. This is absolutely absurd. But Islamophobia, references to racism, sexism, xenophobia, sexual violence, we encourage you to prioritize your mental and emotional well-being as you choose how you want to engage with this statement. Look, if you need that warning, you don't belong in university. You know, universities is where you go to deal with the most out there ideas accessible in our society. So I just wanted to get that right out of the way. Do you have any comment on that?
I mean, well, what can one say? Exactly as you say, this is amazing. Talk about infantilization. Here are students infantilizing themselves and infantilizing all of their academic peers. Of course, it's completely fake. This is the claim to be powerless, the claim to be vulnerable, precisely to exercise power over others, but in the most ludicrous and juvenile manner.
Janice, can you repeat that? Because that is the best summary of this right there.
Yeah, I don't think it's not my idea, and I don't know who it's original with, but it's the idea that it's the claim to be powerless, the claim to be vulnerable in order to exercise power over others. Douglas Murray, I think, coined the phrase cry bullying, and he might even have coined the idea, but it's probably a general idea, but that you claim to be, so devastated, so fragile, so vulnerable. But of course, it's a fake claim. It's precisely done in order to shut other people up and to exercise the most vicious power over anyone with whom you disagree. It's amazing. I just saw an article in Quillette, which I haven't even read yet in its entirety. Somebody sent it to me this morning. which talked about the mourner's veto. This is another interesting phrase. It's the idea that people claim to have been emotionally devastated by something and use that as their source of power. And I think the writer was referring to the reports earlier this week that staff at the publisher that's bringing out Jordan Peterson's second book, they claimed that they were crying and upset, and emotionally devastated at the news that Jordan Peterson's second book is coming out. And that's the mourner's veto, utterly reprehensible and ludicrous power play that's becoming all too common at universities and other elite venues.
I want to get the wording. I want to get that statement written down, that how you summarize the posturing of powerlessness in order to exercise power. Who did you say that was, by the way?
Well, I don't know, exactly who came up with that particular definition. I'm sure I borrowed it from somebody. It's not original to me, but the notion of the cry bully is I think, original to Douglas Murray. Others, I don't know who has talked about the rhetorical ploy of claiming to be powerless in order to exercise power. But that's what this is. I mean, my gosh, it's just
it is incredible.
It's incredible.
But I just love that summary of it, because it really does shine through here in spades, and it shines through in all of the behavior of these cry bullies on campus.
Yeah.
Let's move ahead to the next statement. This is the opening statement of the letter to the McGill community. It is no secret that, like many other academic institutions, McGill University was built on a history of oppression. Its existence made possible by profiting off of the labor of enslaved and marginalized peoples. It is no secret?
What is that? What are they talking about?
Yeah, I have no idea.
No idea. Enslaved peoples? Are they kidding? I mean, the slave trade had been outlawed long before McGill University even came into existence. I have no idea what they're talking about there. Canada was a well-known place of freedom. It was the end of the Freedom Railroad, where escaped slaves went to be free. There were some slaves in early Canada, but they were not used to build McGill University, as far as I know, and certainly there's no link there or anything. I mean, McGill, yes, like all institutions in any society, it has a regrettable history. It has a history of anti-Semitism. Quite interestingly, from the late 1920s right up until the Second World War, it had a quota system for admitting Jewish students, because Jewish students in Montreal, they were too smart. They were flooding into the university because they were so studious and so interested in getting ahead in professions like medicine and law. And so McGill limited the number of Jewish students that it would allow to attend. But, I don't know what they're talking about here with profiting off the labor of enslaved peoples. These Muslim students should look at their own history before they start pointing fingers about the history of slavery and the history of exploitation of subjugated peoples. This is just nonsense.
There's a complete lack of introspection in this group, of course, inward looking. But one wonders what they're doing on campus when they get away with presenting such complete fantasy statements, completely unsupported and completely unsupportable. And yet these are the people who are going to come out into our culture with credentials which will be used to give them credibility. And yet they are uneducable.
Yeah.
Look at what they say. They're uneducable.
Yeah. I mean, this is hysteria here speaking. It's just a nonsensical opening rhetorical gambit. And, you can't take anything that they say seriously after this. But yes, these students are going on to become, academics in their turn. I wonder if this was written by one of the anthropology graduate students who will probably be hired to teach in an anthropology department. Many of these students will go on to become doctors and lawyers and journalists. It's alarming to think of the severe grievance mentality that they carry with them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And this is, in a nutshell, is how feminists took over the university. They've undermined the idea that there is such a thing as knowledge, objective knowledge,
Yeah.
and they've replaced it with the importance of feelings, as you've discussed so frequently. And now they get away with this crap right through every department of the university.
Yeah.
And then they put their feminists, credentialed feminists, who are believed in our culture now, even though they have absolutely no business being called an academic. And then we end up with stuff like it's happening in the Canadian government right now, where they're saying that they're going to have a great reset and it's going to be a feminist reset.
Of course, it must be intersectional and feminist.
They put that right in writing. I'm just flabbergasted at how far from reality our culture has already gotten. And I don't think there's any limit to how far from reality we can go in the future. I think somebody touched, probably Orwell touched on this, is that once you sever that link from the truth, everything's up for grabs. Everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Certainly.
So let's carry on with this letter here. Okay, this regrettable history not only tarnishes the university's past, but also continues to influence how the university operates today. Scholars have abused their right of free speech and academic freedom to defend acts of rhetorical violence against marginalized communities and campus, shielding racist, sexist, and transphobic speech behind the term controversy. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There's
so notice how we go
from there.
I don't even know if it's worth it really, but I thought it was interesting how within a couple of sentences we've gone from enslaved peoples to now acts of rhetorical violence. That's quite a way to travel in one small paragraph, and it shows again the cry bully tactics, the deliberate self-infantilization that you can equate and being enslaved to experiencing rhetorical violence. In other words, hearing something that upsets you. Wow.
I agree. I mean, there's no reconciling this kind of thinking with a university environment. The two are incompatible. You know, what they're really revealing here is that they don't belong at a university.
Yeah. And they should be told that in no uncertain terms. And if the president of this university really cares about the university and maintaining any kind of academic integrity, she would stand up. She's a woman, of course, and I'm sure an intersectional feminist, so she won't do this, but she would stand up and rebuke these students for this kind of ridiculous rhetoric. She should tell them that she's ashamed of them for having written it, but she won't, of course. She'll probably say nothing or even perhaps praise them and attempt to accommodate their demands.
And what you just described there is exactly why we are in this problem today.
Yeah.
She's the university president, is a intersectional feminist. She came through the ranks of anti-intellectualism. She was celebrated for her expressions of feelings. And now she's going to rubber stamp all this crap right through the university, as other intersectional feminists in power in our culture are doing all across the world. This, folks, is in a nutshell why I am so pessimistic about our short-term future. I always remain long-term optimistic because I think ultimately these regimes just utterly destroy themselves after they've destroyed the world beneath them. But that's the problem. They do destroy the world beneath them first before they're gone. Yeah,
there's an awful lot of suffering that results from this kind of nonsense. And that's, very, very frightening. I mean, I should say that I don't know anything. I've never looked up the academic record of the president of McGill, whose name is Suzanne Fortier. So I don't know anything about her, but it's a very good guess that she is an intersectional feminist, because everybody is at the university.
Yeah.
Anyone who advances through the ranks of the administration to the higher levels is that. And as we'll see further on in the letter, she has opened the door to this kind of attack by a statement that she made last month in response to a controversy that has been swirling around the universities in Ontario and Quebec over the last couple of months. So we'll get to that in a minute. And she's made it very clear that she is willing to walk the walk and talk the talk of inclusion and equity.
Well, and very good point. And the question is that if this goes like previous incidents of kind in the past, and if she does stand up against it, her, first of all, her feminist credentials will be undermined, and she will be replaced.
She'll be replaced, exactly.
She will be replaced with a stauncher feminist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we've seen that. Look what happened with Lindsay Shepherd at Wilfrid Laurier. That the incident in which she was grilled by her professor for daring to show a clip from TV Ontario in a class on discussing pronoun usage in a communications class. The president of that university never came out and condemned the professors who grilled her. In fact, made just a lukewarm speech about balancing the values of inclusion and freedom. And that's exactly what Suzanne Fortier has already done and probably will continue to do. That's what the rhetoric is nowadays.
Yeah, these people are far too powerful to really fight without a complete cultural upheaval, I think.
Right. Yeah.
So let's have a look at the next statement then. Freedom of expression is traditionally considered central to permitting the free exchange of ideas and debate and fostering the university environment. Free speech, however, does not exist outside of its social context. David Gilborn, a critical race theorist. There's the problem right there.
There it is.
We should get into that in detail. We should get into critical race theory in detail one day, Janice, I think, because they are wrapping all of their power around this critical race theory.
Yeah.
At the University of Birmingham suggests that the terms of what is considered legitimate speech are dictated by whiteness, since whiteness operates to invest speech with different degrees of legitimacy. Wow, eh?
Well, what can you say? We know that critical race theory is itself a racist theory. It alleges that all white people and only white people are racist. It says the most vicious possible things about white attitudes and white behaviors. It claims that there is nothing white people can do that is not tainted by their white privilege and by their oppressiveness as white people. It's a horrible theory. It has led a Cambridge University professor to say, with the full support of her university, that white lives don't matter. She tweeted that out and was not punished for it in any way. And yet these are the same people that claim that the values of inclusion and diversity should be paramount at the university, and that so-called marginalized people should be able to dictate what others are allowed to say, even what words they're allowed to use. So this is the upside down Alice in Wonderland kind of world that critical race theory, which is a kind of offshoot or a parallel ideology to feminist theory, what that has brought us.
And it puts me back in mind, claiming to be powerless in order to exercise power over others. I just love that statement. It just works everywhere in this. Yeah,
that's exactly what what female students have done every time a men's issues group tried to start up at a university. We saw this, 5 years ago. They claimed to be threatened. They claimed to feel unsafe. They claimed to be afraid to come to campus. And instead of saying, grow up, this is nonsense, they were supported in that cry bullying, in that exercising their mourner's veto, as we could call it, very dangerous stuff.
I like that statement so much. I want to put it up on the screen here for a little while, if you don't mind. This statement is a very concise summary of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So let's carry on with the letter. Whoops, I'll have to remove it. And the next section. Dictated by whiteness. Since whiteness operates to invest speech with different degrees of legitimacy such that already debunked racist beliefs can enjoy repeated public airings where they are lauded as scientific and rational by many white listeners who simultaneously define as irrational, emotional, or exaggerated the opposing views of people of color. I don't know if I've ever seen this really put into practice. Have you ever seen that happen?
I don't know what he's talking about. This is this is just the typical baffle gab of critical race theory. I would challenge anybody to find a professor at a university expressing racist beliefs, airing them in public, lauding them as scientific and rational. No, I don't know what he's talking about. The opposite is true. We've seen over the last couple of months, 6 months maybe, ever since the riots broke out over the death of George Floyd, we have seen nearly every university across North America and elsewhere express their explicit support for Black Lives Matter and their willingness to reorganize departments and course offerings in line with critical race theory and Black studies. We've seen the University of Chicago English department, for example, pledge that it would only accept students who are interested in working in Black studies and from a Black studies perspective. We've seen universities changing the names of departments in order to, recognize the significance of Black contributions to North American culture. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what this person is claiming.
Absolutely agree. What's staggering is how fast and easy that happened. It's like almost overnight, through wide sections of our society, all of this, what they ask for in a whisper or in a shout or in a sign is instantly implemented everywhere. That shows you how far the feminists have infiltrated every aspect of our lives, every pillar of our culture.
Yeah, I mean, over the last few years, occasionally signs have gone up on various North American college campuses that read, "It's okay to be white." I'm sure you've heard about those controversies. I don't think we ever discussed it. At every single university where those signs have appeared, they have been universally denounced as horrific expressions of white supremacy. And the people who put those signs up have been pursued. In one case that I know of, I forget at which university, the student was expelled for having put the signs up. They're universally denounced. Many years ago now, at least 4 or 5 years ago, the students at the University of Western Ontario, it was one of the sports teams, I think, put up a banner that said "Western Lives Matter." It was just having fun with obviously it was using the motto "Black Lives Matter," and that was universally denounced. So the idea that Black lives are devalued on university campuses could not be further from the truth. At the highest levels, even that phrase "Black Lives Matter" has taken on a kind of sacrosanct status.
Yeah, interesting point there. It has taken on that exact status. It can't be questioned, and we're supposed to genuflect before it. Every time we hear Black Lives Matter, we're supposed to go, "Amen."
You can't even, appropriate the phrase and use it even in a friendly kind of joking context that in no way devalues the expression that Black Lives Matter. But, even that, it really has taken on the status of a kind of iconic status that it can't even be used in a different context. It's amazing.
Kind of like you can't draw cartoons of Muhammad.
Of Muhammad, exactly. Yeah.
If you draw a cartoon of Muhammad, they cut your head off.
Yeah.
Well, they're not quite ready to cut your head off for blaspheming against BLM, but
right. But your position at the university will certainly be taken away, and you will be humiliated and disgraced.
And that is the way that the Western world, Western culture cuts people's heads off. They don't have to kill you physically.
No, they just destroy your reputation.
They destroy your capacity to live within the
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
There was a book called the Clan of the Cave Bears dealt with this, and this is a book from many years ago, decades ago, and in it the woman, I don't know where she got the idea to put it in the book. The book was fiction, of course, but it's about the lives of cavemen people, thousands and thousands of years ago. But in any case, when a clan or her clan wanted to shun somebody, or they decide they pronounce them dead, and that person can wander in and out of the village or whatever, but nobody's allowed to look at them, feed them, talk to them, nothing, and eventually the person just dies. That was their way to cut their head off. But and it parallels the Western culture, because imagine someone without money, someone without resource, somebody who needs a job, who's then cut off from any ability to do it. Well, that's doing the same thing. They're dead already. They're just a walking dead person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not, obviously it's not quite that extreme, because the person is not going to be prevented from earning any kind of livelihood, but their chosen profession will be closed to them, and their former friends and colleagues will no longer recognize them as members in good standing. We saw that happen at the University of British Columbia, when the chair of the Board of Governors, remember that fellow Michael Korenberg, who was forced to resign, simply for liking a few tweets, one of which was critical of Black Lives Matter. Again, it shows the absolutely unquestioned sacrosanct nature of the claim to superior victimhood on the part of designated Black identity groups. And merely for liking a tweet, he was forced to step down from his position. So this shows how absolutely uniform the condemnation of any dissent, no matter how minor and trivial.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say, I am prone to rhetorical imaginary exaggeration to push a point in suggesting the way they cut your head off. But I think the parallels are definitely there.
Yeah, the parallels are there.
Yeah. So let's carry on with the letter.
Yeah.
Moreover, evidence from psychology, social work, and medicine suggests that microaggressions, including racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic speech, have numerous significant impacts on the health, well-being, educational success of marginalized people. Well, we should replace that word marginalized with mentally ill people, and they would probably be right. But I don't know that this has been settled work. But if there is, I wouldn't be surprised if there are feminist psychologists out there promoting this kind of false research.
I'm sure there are. I don't know how you could ever prove that specific microaggressions were what is causing, whatever mental illness was being manifested. How could you not prove? How could it not be, or how could you prove that it wasn't that people who already have mental illness, or who are already prone to certain personality disorders, are not simply reacting to these so-called microaggressions and manifesting whatever symptoms of illness that they have? It's one of these impossible kinds of studies. But I do believe that people can make themselves ill by imagining that they are victims. At the same time, come on, if you look at suicide statistics in North America, the group that by far commits suicide most frequently is white men. So what does that say about who is marginalized and who is a vulnerable population group? Well,
saying I don't like feminism is a microaggression that will be treated very seriously, and yet a false accusation of rape that leads the man to spend 10 years in prison and puts him at suicide risk is not treated as a problem. That's the kind of culture we're living in right now.
Yeah, exactly. So which is the microaggression? We're talking about macroaggressions that aren't even recognized in the culture. So yeah, exactly. again, it's those who claim to be powerless that get to define what counts as an act of aggression.
That is the best statement of the video so far. Claiming to be powerless in order to exercise power over others.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you put it right out there clearly and concisely, exactly like that. And let's carry on with the letter. The defense of discriminatory dialogue at the expense of safety. There's that word, safety. They use that word to justify any cruelty, inhumanity, restriction of freedoms, safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me read that over because I kind of got distracted. The defense of discriminatory dialogue at the expense of safety, security, and well-being of people of color reflects the power of whiteness in determining what is and is not considered acceptable speech.
There it is again. I mean, this is just, What do they mean by safety? These words, security, well-being, all of these words are appropriated in order to claim that something is being done to people, yet there is never any evidence brought forward that something is actually being done. We're never talking about physical security. We're talking about an idea of emotional well-being that translates into the demand by these people that nothing ever be said that offends them. But that is a choice that they make, obviously, to be offended, because the university environment today is a left-leaning, progressivist, intersectional, anti-white, anti-Western, pro-feminist, pro-Islamic culture that goes out of its way not to offend the self-declared, doyens of grievance. So it's just nonsense for them to pretend that the environment in which they are working is one that it destroys their well-being.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. And we're going to see there's a key word coming up in this letter shortly that tells you exactly where this idea of safety, not being safe, is pointing to. I think you know the word I'm talking about. Let's carry on with the letter. Okay. Upholding free speech at the cost of marginalized groups permits racist talk with real-world impacts. It teaches future generations that perpetrating this kind of harm is acceptable. These harms are not hypothetical. They have been and will continue to be felt, here's your hint, by marginalized communities on campuses across the country.
Let's keep going.
Next page. In a recent controversy at the University of Ottawa, a fellow U15 student,
That U15 just refers to the 15 top research universities in Canada, of which McGill is one and the University of Ottawa is one.
Okay. A professor used a racial slur during a lecture. My son goes to the University of Ottawa, and he was telling me about this incident before it became the news. So it's an incident I'm a little bit familiar with.
Yes.
While students described the use of slurs as alienating and isolating, 34 current and retired University of Ottawa professors penned a letter claiming that the use of slurs constituted a matter of academic freedom. And I might just say, this was explained to me by my son, I think this incident goes back a year, perhaps more. Or it's about a year old.
There may well be one, but there's another that was more recent. It occurred in September.
What my son explained to me was that the professor used the N-word in class and in order to discuss how using the N-word was a bad thing to do. You can't make this stuff up, Janice. Really. I mean, they're really tying your hands, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. The incident that I think they're actually referring to, where these 34 University of Ottawa professors signed a letter defending academic freedom, then they go on to talk about it more. A number of professors also signed a second letter. The way it's described in this letter, in this open letter, is so dishonest. It implies that the person actually used the N-word as a slur, actually called a student that word, which I agree would be shocking. And I wouldn't believe that it would ever happen in a Canadian university classroom unless a person was actually mentally ill. And indeed, it did not happen that way. The word was not used as a slur. It was used in a class on, it was an art and gender class, and it was used by a part-time female professor who was talking about the reclaiming of words that have historically been used as slurs and are now in the process of being reclaimed or have been reclaimed by the group that was originally targeted by the slur. And there's a good example, there's millions of examples, I guess, but a really obvious example from contemporary culture is the use of the word queer, which was once a derogatory slur used against homosexual people and has now been totally reclaimed. It's even the title, you study queer theory at university and nobody gasps in disbelief. It's now an honorific, if anything. And so she referenced the N word as another word that is being reclaimed or has been reclaimed by Black people themselves and is frequently used by Black people. Her mistake was that she actually said the word out. She didn't use it as a slur. She didn't realize, I guess, how that word has become an utterly forbidden word, that non-Black people are not allowed to use at all. And so for using the word in a context where she was simply discussing the empowerment of formerly marginalized groups of people, she's been widely denounced, and she was, in fact, suspended from her position. So she was very harshly punished for a very minor mistake.
Well said, Janice. And the use of these words goes in the other direction too, because years ago when I was growing up in Britain, and I've heard it used I had some British friends, they used the word fag for cigarettes. And I don't think they do use that anymore, because now it's become associated with the American usage of the word as they come homosexual. And now I can't say I've heard the word fag used anywhere for maybe decades now.
Yeah, most people are very sensitive about these things. Most people are eager not to use offensive words. It's ridiculous that in an academic context you can't use the full N word without losing your job. But that's where we've got to. And this whole prohibiting of certain words by certain people, of course, is itself a power play. Whites in particular cannot use the N word. We had over the summer an example of Wendy Mesley, the CBC personality. She was, I guess, fired. I don't know what's happened to her, actually. She was suspended for using the N word. I mean, I keep using the word now. I keep saying the N word instead of using the word, because I too am made deeply uncomfortable now by the outrage that follows any non-Black person's use of that word. And Wendy Mesley made the mistake of using the full word, but it occurs in a book title, a famous book in the Canadian, especially the Quebecois context, called White Niggers of America. It's a book by an FLQ leader. He was a leader of a revolutionary pro-Quebec independence group. It was a Marxist guerrilla group. It used violence in an attempt to achieve Quebec independence. He wrote a book. His name is Pierre Valliere. He wrote a book in French. I think it was called Nègre Blanc d'Amérique. And he compared the situation of Quebec people as subjugated peoples within Anglophone Canada to the situation of Black people in the United States before the Civil Rights Movement. He didn't use it in a derogatory way, and Wendy Mesley was merely quoting the title of the book, and for that she was widely denounced, claimed to have used a racial slur. It's not a slur if it's a book title and you're simply quoting the title of the book. And widely denounced, and as far as I know, she's gone from CBC. I don't think she's ever been reinstated. I mean, that's amazing to me. And these are the same people that claim that Black people in the university context are disempowered. Are you kidding me? What greater power could you have than to have people dismissed for using a word that you have decided white people aren't allowed to use.
That's excellent points, Janice. And I want to pause for a second on what Shaman King XYZ said here. He says, hearing Janice say words like that, even in a neutral context, is weird. And I have to say, I felt this tiny sense of shock when you used the word too, because I don't know if I've heard a white person use that word in probably 3 or 4 decades. And you know, I wanted to also point out how extensively, how quickly, and how easily this has entered our psyche, and how quickly we adapt to it and comply with these social demands. Because when I grew up, and this is going back a ways in the 60s, for instance, you remember the phrase "eeny, meeny, miny, mo"?
Yes, of course.
You remember what comes after that?
Yeah,
I'm not even going to say it.
Catch a tiger by his toe. I know.
Exactly. It wasn't catch a tiger. It wasn't catch a tiger. And I don't know when it switched over to catch a tiger, but when all kinds of kids said that little nursery rhyme. Yeah. And nobody batted an eye. And yet, at the same time, we had black friends. You know, I went to high school with some black people, and I had a black friend a mixed friend who we used to sail with in the summer, and even they would use that phrase, and nobody had their hurt feelings about it. No. All of this is manufactured.
It's a very recent thing. It's a manufactured issue. It is. I mean, if you watch movies from the 1990s, what's the famous Quentin Tarantino movie from the 1990s? I just rewatched it. I'm blanking on the title. You know, the really famous one.
You had a lot of famous ones. Would it be the one with John Travolta?
Yeah, the one with John Travolta.
Oh, yeah. I always forget that one, too.
I can't believe I just
movie,
saw it.
Great movie.
It's a great movie. Somebody in our audience must know it.
Somebody in our audience will know it. John Travolta, and he had I always forget. I'm not good with names or names of movies or names of actors.
I'm terrible that way now. I mean, I've lost my mind in the last 20 years. I've lost my memory. But I just rewatched it, you know, like in the last 8 months. And the N-word is used liberally in a movie I would say that is a kind of post-racial movie. There are black and white characters in the movie, and there's a lot of violence in the movie and everything, but it is not racialized violence. And Pulp Fiction, thank you. Jeez, thank you so much. And you know, and it is shocking now to hear the ease and the utter inconsequentiality of the use of that word. So that's just like, 20 years ago or so that it was commonly used, and clearly it didn't mean anything to either black or white characters. And now it's become a forbidden word, and people are having their careers and reputations ruined over, I mean, and of course, like I would never call somebody that, and I don't know any respectable people or well-intentioned people who would call somebody that, even jokingly, unless they were very close friends. But merely to quote, to refer to the word as a word, wow. I mean, that's a very strange level of interdiction.
Yeah, and especially that it is in universities in which they're making these complaints. You could sort of see it in popular culture, saying, "Oh, you can't say it like that. You can't say this. You can't say that." It doesn't really matter. They can say you can't say it, and you can say it, and there's no punishment, or maybe there's no punishment. Maybe you're beat up by a mob. But in an academic environment, to put such restrictions is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange. Like, what happens to a person just from hearing the word, especially given that it's a word that is used regularly by black people themselves? So what does that mean to claim that it's hurtful to hear the word? And how is it any different from saying the N-word? Since the N-word obviously conjures the actual word in one's mind. We all know which word is being referred to. So eventually even the N-word will be deeply hurtful and offensive. And so we'll have to have we'll say the word formerly referred to as the N-word. You know, I mean, it's really bizarre.
What did Shakespeare say? A rose is a rose by any other name. So I mean, now it's starting to apply to a word is a word by any other word.
And it will
We'll
be
have a new
very-
word. It'll mean the same thing,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
now we can use it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre, and the idea. I mean, it will spread, I assume. I even saw recently that someone was in trouble for using the R word, and I didn't
There's
know.
an R word.
Yeah, at first I was I was completely blank. I didn't know what word that was. I then read the article, or it was a tweet or something, and the R word is retard. And so that's now becoming a word that one cannot use, and that has to be. And this will spread because, again,
Well,
it
let's
is
get ahead of the game here, and
power.
let's get ahead of the game, and let's just say retard now is mental midget. Okay, you heard it here first. Or we could call it retard is now feminist. Just say
Yeah.
feminist. They're not going to ban that word.
I mean, and I find it really, really offensive. If we're going to talk about being offended, I'm really irritated by how in the open letter this incident with this woman, who, by the way, apologized immediately and I'm sure profusely for her misstep. How can you continue to claim that this was hurtful when the woman apologized for using the word? Obviously, she did not mean any attempt, any offense, any attempt to marginalize. Anyhow, the way in which it's described in the open letter, you would think that this person actually called somebody the N-word. And I find that really just disgusting. It's a deliberate attempt to mislead people who are reading this open letter to think that something happened that didn't actually happen at all.
I agree with you, Janice. I think we're on the same page in this issue in every single way possible. Shall we carry on with the letter?
Yeah, maybe we should rush through. I think we've already probably beaten it to death, and we're only at the third of the way through. So let's rush through the rest.
I think that we're getting on there pretty far. Okay, this letter was joined by a second signed by over 500 Quebec professors. That's a sign of hope, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Including 3 from McGill. On October 26, 2020, Principal and Vice Chancellor Suzanne Fortier shared a message with McGill students and staff on academic freedom and inclusiveness. In this message, Principal Fortier recognizes the tensions between academic freedom and inclusivity.
Yes.
Is there a
Now
tension? Is there
Yeah.
a tension? Is there a tension, do you think, between academic freedom and inclusivity? I mean, there is, if by inclusivity you mean if you can't understand and cut it in academia, you shouldn't be included in academia. I'll accept that.
Well, I mean, the idea that inclusion is a value of the university, in the first place, is nonsense. And this is how we got into trouble when universities started declaring, and I don't know when it began exactly, probably about 20 years ago, they began stating that social justice, inclusion, diversity, equity, they began saying that these were part of their core values. And also, of course, making a commitment to the pursuit of truth and academic freedom and those kinds of values. And as soon as they did that, they were in trouble because they are opposed. On the one hand, we have the dictatorship of the aggrieved. And you can't have academic freedom coexist with that. And so that was the beginning of the end for universities. And they keep on, principles like Suzanne Fortier keep on claiming that somehow these two principles can coexist, but they can't. And the one should be jettisoned. Inclusion should not be a value of the university. Social justice should not be a value of the university. Respectful treatment of all should be a value of the university, but respectful treatment means that you assume that the other person is a mature adult who's capable of hearing an offensive word without collapsing.
Exactly. I mean, here's the problem. This woolly thinking has infiltrated the entire university system from top to bottom at every university. And this idea that inclusivity and equity are somehow universally understood and good, universally good. They aren't. And this should be 100% defended at universities because university isn't an inclusive environment. It
No,
should
sure
be
not.
an inclusive environment.
It's an elitist environment. It's a place where one competes intellectually, and where
Exactly.
those who can't compete will not get the prize at the end. It has to be that way. And that can be actually quite devastating to fail out of something that perhaps you had set your heart on achieving. But that's what a university is all about. It's about separating the best and the brightest from the mediocre or the incompetent. And somehow that in itself has been forgotten.
And that I just wanted to cap off my point here in that it's not that inclusivity is bad, and it's not that exclusivity is good. It's just what measures you bring to distinguish between them. And in the university environment, the measure should be your capacity to think, as measured by accepted standards. And we have those standards. You have to get a certain grade to be accepted. So they've undermined all of that process by using terms like inclusivity and equity as if these are like freedom of speech to begin with. They're not.
They're not. They're not in any way. And at some level, of course, we all agree that students should not have to attend in an environment where racial slurs are flung at them, or where raw bigotry or raw sexism are part of the orthodoxy of the university. I absolutely agree. Unfortunately, the university is now an environment where raw sexism and raw racial bigotry are accepted, but they're not against the so-called marginalized, as this open letter is claiming. We have professors who will say openly, as did Susanna Walters at Northeastern University, writes an op-ed entitled, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" We've had, Sheila Jeffries, one of the most man-hating feminists imaginable, taught in political studies at the University of Melbourne for decades, where she spewed out the most nonsensical hatred against men. Oh, by the way, Susanna Walters clarified after she wrote that article in the Washington Post that it was really white men, older white men, that she particularly hated. So we now do have a situation where the open hatred of white men is not only tolerated, but even valued at universities. And I think that's deplorable. But that's another issue altogether. We've talked about that over and over again. And, where a teacher at Eton College just this week, you may have heard the story of Will Noland, who is a master at Eton College, which is a very prestigious school for boys in Britain, boys aged 13 to 18. He made a video lecture in which he criticized feminist theory and defended traditional masculinity as biologically rooted and good for the world and good for women. He was fired for that. The takeover of the university by radical feminist, radical leftist forces has already happened. And to continue to pretend that this is a place where Muslim students have their feelings wounded, or where Black students are made to suffer under, the humiliation of being called racial slurs, is just a fantasy.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I'll just pick back to your early point there, is that it's escaped the university and it's full-fledged in our society, as evidenced in the slur of whiteness. It is now acceptable to slur all white people with an umbrella term, vaguely slamming whiteness itself. Yeah. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We do have quite a few more to go through. Do you want to skip through it a few really quickly, and so we can get to the back?
Come through it to the end. Get to the end there. It's quite shocking what we get to.
Okay. The manner in which academic freedom was invoked in the recent controversy at the University of Ottawa conflated the utterance of a racial slur with the teaching of material featuring racial slurs, which is what I referred to in my son's class. which should only be allowed after robust equity training, serious consideration, and the input of students from the directly affected group.
Whatever that means. So in other words, you can't use a certain word unless you get agreement from all of the students. How would that even happen? You'd have to consult with students before you can teach certain material. I mean, that's just
This
ridiculous.
is the inmates trying to take over the asylum right there.
Right there, yeah.
This harmful conflation, which was used to defend academics' use of racial slurs, was perpetuated by Principal Fortier in her message. Oh boy, Principal, they're coming for you.
Yeah.
While material featuring harmful language can be used prudently, the use of bigoted material, whether ableist, transphobic, racist, or otherwise discriminatory, is unacceptable, and McGill University has made no effort to resolve this tension. The university's Statement of Academic Freedom defines no limitations for academic freedom, failing to address the responsibility of professors to use their freedom responsibly.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
As defined by these aggrieved students, of course.
Yes, claiming to be powerless in order to exercise power over others.
Yeah.
Equity and academic freedom need to be addressed as intertwined issues and McGill University falls short in this regard. Okie dokie. Equity and academic freedom. Where do they find these connections?
And I did just want to say that the principal, this Suzanne Fortier, she opened the door to this claim because she did write this letter that they have linked to, and I went and read it. And she did this after the controversy erupted around this poor woman, this part-time professor at the University of Ottawa used the N-word in this art and gender class. There was this controversy that erupted, and this McGill principal wrote a letter in which she said, oh, there's this tension, and we have to listen, and we have to have dialogue, and I realize that academic freedom can be very hurtful. And so she basically tried to write a letter in which she supported academic freedom, but in which she also mollified those students who were outraged at the so-called use of a racial slur. And that was her mistake, because you can never mollify these people, even if you roll over and, absolutely pledge to do everything that they demand. They will ultimately find that you are wanting in the rigidity of your adherence to their orthodoxy. And so, but she opened the door by pretending to care about their feelings. And now they're going to push her and push her and push her, and she will have to decide whether she's willing to defend academic freedom at all.
Good point. Let's carry on. Peer institutions like the University of British Columbia and Western University clarify boundaries for the academic freedom afforded to their scholars. At UBC, academics are responsible for familiarizing themselves with accepted scholarly standards and following them honestly, openly, fairly, and accountably. Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah. Faculty members at Western have the responsibility to make a balanced presentation of controversial issues and may not use their classrooms as a forum for advancing their personal opinions. Nothing of this is just
nobody,
course.
nobody disagrees with that. Unfortunately, some professors do, but it's the far left Marxist feminists who do so most often.
Yeah. While peer institutions prioritize respect and inclusivity, McGill University consistently prioritizes the protection of an extreme version of academic freedom over the safety and well-being of its students, regardless of claims like those in the principal's message, and they support an environment of mutual respect. I don't know
we don't need to comment on that. Let's just get to the last little bit about their attack on this retired professor.
Okay. While the university has policies dedicated to the maintenance of respect, like policy on harassment and discrimination prohibited by law, none can abridge academic freedom in the university's educational mission. That's actually a good statement to put in there.
Yeah. Well, so in other words, this is proving that McGill is lagging behind other universities in entirely carving out its commitment to academic freedom. It hasn't yet gutted it, but it may well do.
And yet, this is the most important statement in a university's statement on academic freedom. It should be included in
Absolutely.
every one of these
Yeah.
universities.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Charter of Students' Rights, the one document dedicated entirely to the protection of students, comes with the caveat that it cannot be applied in such a way that it restricts academic freedom. Good for them. Geez, I'm starting to respect McGill a little bit.
Yeah.
So while the Charter provides that students have a right to be free from vexatious conduct, good statement, the university continues to allow professors to operate in a gray area where academic freedom and inclusivity are both encouraged, but only academic freedom is truly protected. Actually, that's a good thing.
Sounds good.
That
Yeah.
sounds really good. And they present it as a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. They want to be able to do things like what happened at Brock University a couple of years ago, in which a retired professor, merely for making a number of tweets that the university deemed offensive and intemperate, lost his emeritus status, his honorary status that recognized his achievements as an academic. He had that status stripped from him merely for a couple of personal tweets that he had made. That's the kind of thing that these students want taken away at McGill University, or they want it possible for that to happen to professors. Even retired professors must not be beyond the reach of their power to shame and humiliate.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Shall we get back to the letter?
Yeah, let's just finish it off.
Okay, so while the Charter provides that students have a right to be free from vexatious... Oh, we did that already.
Yeah, we already did that one, yeah.
Okay, when the voices of students are sidelined and disregarded...
Yeah.
It's hard to read that with a straight face.
Yeah.
The solution is not and cannot be active listening and dialogue, the principal argued. While inclusiveness and academic freedom are both invaluable principles, they cannot always coexist. True, you have to kick some kids out of university. Thus, when the university refuses to define limitations to academic freedom, the safety and well-being of marginalized students become inherently secondary. Yeah. This is best exemplified by the university's decision to first underline their respects for free speech when bigoted dialogues do make their way onto campus. The message McGill sends is all too clear. When equity and academic freedom come into conflict, they are more than ready to abandon one principle in favor of another. Yeah, I agree with the university.
And this just shows how useless it is to attempt to accommodate the little Jacobins at every university, because when you attempt to accommodate them, it's never enough. They are never appeased. They hate it that free speech has any purchase at a university at all. They will not be satisfied until they can dictate exactly what professors are allowed to say and do. So there's no point in attempting to mollify them, as Principal Fortier has done and as other principals of universities have done. It's always a losing game, and it will always come down to this. They will force them to choose, and if they don't choose to allow students to dictate everything that's said, it will always be seen as inadequate.
Yep, I see we're coming to a cultural war here, because the feminists cannot stop. They are obsessive, compulsive tyrants. They will continue to grow like a cancer in our culture until enough sane, healthy people stand up and root the cancer out completely.
Yeah.
A free society cannot exist with cancerous feminism in it.
No.
It grows until it destroys the society.
Yeah. And it's not going to happen now in universities. Like there is no way the universities can be reformed from within. The rot has gone so thoroughly. It is at the very highest levels. It is throughout the whole middle administration. It is in the professoriate completely. And as we see, the students have themselves become infected. And of course, people say, well, not all students. And that's true. But the students who have the most passion, the students who are running for student government, who are involved in student clubs, and all, who the students whose voices are heard loudest, are clearly in favor of further and further restrictions, in favor of a far left ideological maneuver.
Well, that's the key there, is that the ideology itself has taken root into the main blood vessels of our culture. So it is rooted right in there. So those loud students, they're not just loud students, they are loud students professing this ideology, which is infecting our entire culture.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Okay, let's get to
anyway. Let's finish it off. This is the final last bit. Yeah.
In the past year, several articles have been posted on public forums by Professor Philip Carl Saltzman. They want to get rid of this guy, eh?
Yeah.
A retired professor emeritus of the McGill Anthropology Department. In one recent example, Saltzman goes on to write that the Middle East is a place where doing harm and being cruel to others is regarded as a virtue and a duty. Let's carry on. Here we go. Saltzman goes on to condemn multiculturalism, immigration, gender parity, cultural equality, social justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement, along with dismissing the existence of rape culture and systemic racism. Well, rape culture exists. We saw an example of it where women are getting away with raping young boys and not going to prison for it.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, it exists in prison.
It exists, and it's against men only in our culture.
Yeah.
Shall we finish the entire thing off?
Yeah, let's finish it off, yeah.
Despite the editorial nature, Saltzman's opinions are presented as though they are objective facts. Meanwhile, his affiliation with McGill lends him credibility that would not otherwise be afforded if not for his status as a professor emeritus of a respected institution such as McGill University. In providing such commentary while presenting himself as an affiliate of this university, Saltzman's recent publications in public fora demonstrate a lack of consideration for his responsibility as an academic. Framing this as an issue of Professor Saltzman's academic freedom rather than the right of Muslims and people of color to feel safe. There's it, right there.
There it is, yeah.
The right to feel safe. The right to feel safe is not a right. It's not a right. It never existed and it can't exist. But anyways, right. I'm digressing.
No.
Illustrates the way in which McGill maintains structures that protect and legitimize racist and Islamophobic dialogues. Academic freedom at McGill cannot be used to shield those who abuse their status and privilege as academics. If McGill wants to remain steadfast and unequivocal in its commitment to a working and learning environment in which every member feels included, valued, and respected, it must hold those who misuse their academic freedoms accountable and maintain a standard of intellectual exchange where such issues are approached respectfully and with humility.
That's the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, with humility, come on. These people don't know humility. They wouldn't know it if it hit them in the face.
And they've wordsmithed this all up in an attempt to sound reasonable, but when you don't have to scratch very far to the surface. It's right there on the surface. Their totalitarianism. They're
demanding the right to feel safe. And I mean, we don't even need to read this last bit. They want the removal of Philip Carl Saltzman's emeritus status, and they want McGill's statement of academic freedom to be, revised in light of their concerns.
There's a couple of things we should emphasize here. Let's just read this little bit here. To ensure lasting change, we furthermore demand an immediate, transparent, and student-centered overhaul of McGill's statement of academic freedom, enshrining the university's commitment to inclusivity in teaching and research and policy. That would be the death knell of a university. That's the death knell of any university. You can't have academic honesty in that situation.
No, they want an absolute veto over everything that is taught and published by university personnel. It's utterly ridiculous. And in a way, it doesn't even matter. But I know the writing of Philip Carl Saltzman very, very intimately. I read nearly everything that he publishes. I've never met him, but I consider him a friend. We're part of an email group. He emails out pretty much whenever he publishes something that he thinks will be of interest to people. And so I read it, and it's always well argued, well reasoned, meticulously researched. He was a long-standing professor of anthropology. He wrote many important books. Now he writes more generally about attacks on academic freedom in the university context. He does indeed argue against feminist orthodoxy. He argues against the Black Lives Matter movement and its ideology, with proofs. His work is always extensively well supported with facts, evidence, serious studies. It's absolutely a lie to say that he presents opinions as if they are facts. He does not. He clearly distinguishes between his opinions and the facts that he uses to support his opinions. And these students would be a lot better off if they actually read his work, and if they want to try to argue with it, then all power to them. I doubt they'd be able to best him in any argumentative exchange. It's just ridiculous that they think that because they don't like what he has to say, they should be able to demand that he be stripped of his emeritus status. Emeritus status is something that is awarded to professors when they retire as recognition of their achievements as professors. It has nothing to do with what the professor does in his retirement. It has everything to do with what he actually accomplished when he was teaching at the university. So it's both incredibly ignorant and, of course, as you said, terrifyingly totalitarian to think that just because they don't like the articles he publishes now in his retirement, that they should be able to demand that he be stripped of that status.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, Janice.
It really is.
I can't even believe I can be shocked at this point for the number of times we've had to face the fact that this totalitarianism it runs our much of our culture. What about this? Do you think we could get Professor Saltzman to talk to us on a live stream?
He might be interested. Yeah, I could certainly ask him.
Yeah, I would love it if you could. The topic is obvious. I mean, the topic is freedom of speech on campus in particular, but I actually think we should keep it open to freedom of speech in our culture, broadly speaking, because it's really under attack everywhere. I mean, the frontline battle, I think, for freedom of speech is being done on campuses.
Yeah. Well,
but the more they win there, the more they win broadly, and then it ends up in law.
Yeah. Well, the crazy ideas that are taught to students on university campuses soon trickle out with every succeeding wave of students who graduate and go out into the wider world and into all the major institutions of our society. I thought it was interesting, by the way, just the very last point about that letter, that the very worst thing they could find to say about Professor Saltzman was that he has an article where he says that some cruel acts are valued in certain Middle Eastern societies. Keep in mind, that was the absolute worst thing they could find that he had said in any of the articles that offended them and that they looked at. And I can imagine he had abundant examples and evidence for making that point. But that was the worst thing that they consider beyond the pale, utterly lacking in respect. That should be prohibited. For that, he deserves to have his emeritus status removed. That's how crazy these students are, and how deeply vicious their sense of righteousness in humiliating a professor they don't like. But I think it'd be great.
That's right in line with their pushing this idea of Islamophobia. If you even speak the truth about the darker sides of Islam, you're all of a sudden a Islamophobic. So they really do want us to suppress the truth in order to maintain this fantasy of a multicultural world of peace and harmony. Yeah, it's very disturbing. And I will speak to Professor Saltzman, see if he'd be interested. I know that this attack on him
was disturbing, even though we also recognize that it's a badge of honor in many ways. It means that you are actually standing up for the truth, and you are going into those taboo areas that little totalitarians, all the little Hitlers that are there on university campuses have decided you're not allowed to talk about. He does go into those areas, and he tackles them with wit and incredibly meticulous research, informed by his years as a serious anthropologist. But even that is now considered beyond the pale.
So let's try and get him on the next show with you 2 weeks from now.
I'll ask him if he'd be willing to do so.
Let's go for the 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday, the 19th of December, if we can.
I'll ask
This
him
is
about that.
obviously tentative. If he's agreeable and you're agreeable, it's a done deal. Just message me and let's do it. I think it'll be a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, and he's a good man. He doesn't deserve this ridiculous slur. And, you know, the sad thing is that these slurs work to a certain extent. People who don't know anything about Professor Saltzman, reading this open letter, thousands of students at the University of McGill and elsewhere will assume there must be something a little off about his perspective. And some will support his right to free expression, but it will always linger that, you know, he writes in an offensive manner, that he's deliberately hurtful, that there's something bigoted about him. I also think it's very interesting that they're carrying out this attack on a Jewish professor, given McGill's history of anti-Semitism, that they can make this attack, with a complete sense of impunity. I find that shameful too.
Yeah, of course it is, on any group. But yeah, like you point out, maybe they haven't rooted out anti-Semitism at McGill. Maybe it's maybe it's not McGill's anti-Semitic past, it's McGill's anti-Semitic way of life.
Well, certainly, I think that is a question that these students should ask themselves, since it's the kind of question they like to ask of others. So I would certainly ask of them, is this an expression of their anti-Semitism?
It could be. Very well. Janice,
okay.
Always a pleasure. Always a
Good
pleasure.
to talk to you.
Thank you so much again for being on Studio Burlé for the coffee sessions.
Okay.
And
Take
as I
care.
like to remain... Thank you. And as I like to remind everybody, do something you love today and every day. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love and do it. Because no matter how bad it gets, this is your life right now, right here. And with that, don't forget to join us next time on Studio